Dr. Adrianos Ororontu, Vice Rector Wiwata, Dr. Manto, Dr. Budianto, students of the University of Indonesia, Ambassador of Russia, Ambassador of Ukraine, other ambassadors who are here today. I want to express my very deep thanks to the university for organizing this very interesting debate, and also for including the United States as part of this. I think that Russia's intervention in Ukraine is a very, very important issue for the United States, for the same reason that it's an important issue for Indonesia and every other country. It has very profound implications for the stability of international law and norms, and it has important implications for Southeast Asia. To be clear, Russia's military intervention in Ukraine, its illegal occupation of Crimea, and its annexation of Crimea violate the most fundamental principle of international law, and that is respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. You all know the sequence of events that has happened in Ukraine. Ukraine had been negotiating an association agreement and a free trade agreement with the European Union since 2008. However, in late 2013, the Ukrainian government unilaterally suspended those negotiations despite very strong popular support in what was seen as a deliberate attempt and decision by President Yanukovych to reject cooperation with Europe in favor of closer cooperation with Russia. As a result, thousands of people took to the streets to demonstrate their support for closer cooperation with the European Union. And President Yanukovych's government began a violent crackdown on demonstrators. On February 21st, President Yanukovych and members of the opposition signed a compromise agreement negotiated with the help of 3 European foreign ministers acting as mediators. Under its terms, President Yanukovych had 48 hours to sign the first piece of agreed action, a constitutional reform. And not only did he not sign that, but he actually ran away and left the country. Contrary to claims that a coup took place, the democratically elected parliament overwhelmingly voted to remove Yanukovych from the office that he had abandoned, with 328 votes in favor and none against. The parliament empowered a transitional government and set an early date for national elections, which will take place on May 25th. Many countries, including the United States, came to the assistance of Ukraine to support this transition, but not Russia. Russia refused to speak to the new government in Kiev. Instead, it deployed troops across the sovereign border into Crimea. And these troops took control of Ukrainian military bases and local government buildings. For weeks, Moscow denied these troops were Russians, even though they drove vehicles with Russian license plates and identified themselves as Russians to local reporters. President Putin finally admitted 2 weeks ago on Russian television that he did in fact send these troops into Crimea. Since then, there's evidence of continued Russian support for a concerted, orchestrated campaign of incitement and sabotage to undermine and destabilize the Ukrainian state. In addition, Russian leaders continue to threaten to invade Ukraine again, and Russian troops, 40,000, are massed along the Ukrainian border. Russia often claims that its agents are not active inside Ukraine, but many of the separatists and militias in eastern Ukraine are outfitted with bulletproof vests, camouflage uniforms with insignias removed, and they're carrying Russian-designed weapons. Moreover, Russian internet sites are openly recruiting volunteers to travel from Russia to Ukraine to incite violence. The international community has been united in condemning Russia's unilateral intervention and supporting Ukrainian sovereignty and the broader principle of respect for international law and norms. Here in Indonesia, Foreign Minister Nalagawa made a statement early on highlighting the importance of territorial integrity, and he urged restraint. He also stated Indonesia's rejection of the so-called referendum, which goes against Ukraine's constitution. In the UN General Assembly, Indonesia and the United States joined 100 other nations in an overwhelming vote of support for Ukraine's sovereignty. Why do countries like Indonesia and the United States have such a strong interest in Ukraine? This is a case of a serious threat to the basic underlying principles of international law and norms. These basic principles of sovereignty and territorial integrity must be upheld, not just in order to protect the rights of Ukraine's citizens, but to defend those principles on which all countries rely. In fact, President Putin once shared this view as well. Last year, he wrote a famous editorial in the New York Times in which he talked about the importance of international and the illegitimacy of international unilateral action. The basic fact is that Russia historically recognized and acknowledged Ukraine's borders. Prior to the illegitimate referendum in Crimea, there was no border dispute between Ukraine and Russia. Russia acknowledged Ukrainian sovereignty over Crimea as a matter of historical fact. The UN Charter commits Russia to abide by those borders. And moreover, Russia made a specific commitment with regard to Ukraine's sovereignty in the 1994 Budapest Memorandum. Under that agreement, Ukraine voluntarily gave up the entire arsenal of nuclear weapons that it had, inherited from the Soviet Union. And in return, the United States, Russia, and the United Kingdom guaranteed to respect Ukrainian independence and sovereignty within its existing borders and refrain from the threat or use of force against Ukraine. Russia's violation of the Budapest Agreement, therefore, not only strikes at international laws and norms, but also undermines 45 years of multilateral diplomacy on non-proliferation and disarmament. The United States has worked with countries in Europe and Asia and around the world to urge Russia to enter into peaceful dialogue with the Ukrainian government. After more than a month, as the ambassador pointed out, Russia sat down with Ukraine, the United States, and the EU in Geneva on April 17th. And all four countries agreed to take steps to de-escalate the crisis. And I want to express my appreciation for the support that the ambassador expressed for the Geneva Agreement. Indeed, Russia agreed to use its influence over the separatist troops in eastern Ukraine to have them stand down, disarm, and leave the buildings that they have seized. Russia also agreed to cooperate with OSCE observers, 7 of whom are still being held hostage in eastern Ukraine with Ukrainian Defense Ministry officials. The people of Ukraine are still waiting for Russia to follow through on the commitments that it made in Geneva. President Obama said late last week during his visit to Asia, "We have not seen Russia abide by the spirit or the letter of the agreement in Geneva." Specifically, Russia has not followed through to urge separatists and militias in eastern Ukraine to lay down their arms, vacate buildings, and begin a process of dialogue that will lead to de-escalation. Because of that failure, the President convened a conference call with several of his European counterparts over the weekend. And those consultations led to a very strong G7 statement over the weekend that found that Russia was not meeting its commitments under the Geneva Accord and therefore urged additional targeted sanctions to impose a cost on Russia. Yesterday, the United States announced additional sanctions against Russia, which included travel bans and asset freezes for 7 Russian individuals, freezing the assets of 17 Russian companies. 13 Russian companies will face additional restrictions as the government will cut off the export or re-export of American-made products to them. And these sanctions are having an impact.